Hi everyone. Today we are going to cover some basics on trimming our pottery. So once you've thrown on the wheel, you have to trim your pots, get them clean, makes them look nice. The first thing I like to do is kind of pick up my pots, feel how heavy they are. I like to feel for thickness, especially in the bottom. Do I have enough room to do a foot ring? Maybe if it's too thin, I'm just gonna trim it flat. Both are fine, but I will show you both so that you can learn. First, let's start with getting our pot centered on our wheel head. So using these lines on your wheel head, these circles, you can get a good gauge of where center is. If your pot isn't perfectly symmetrical, sometimes these circles don't help as much, but from here, what we can do, once we've gotten it pretty close to center, is we can take our pin tool and you're gonna hold it. If you're right-handed, you're gonna touch down over here at 3 o'clock. If you're left-handed and you're spinning your wheel in the opposite direction, you're gonna touch over here at 9 o'clock. So hold your pin tool, 2 hands, and just touch down and make a nice light circle on the bottom of your pot. Then you can stop your wheel and you can kind of measure the distance from the edge of your circle to the edge of your base. You wanna see that it's totally even all the way around. So looking at this, it looks to me like this side is a little bit skinnier and this side might be a little wider, so I'm gonna move my pot in the direction of the slightly skinnier side, and then I'll touch down and make another circle. Check again. Okay, this time I can see this side a little wider, this side a little skinnier. Let's move it that way a little. And then we'll make another circle. Take a look. That looks pretty good to me. My last step is to hold a finger on the side of my pot and just kind of feel that it feels fairly stable. If you're just trimming your bottom flat, like let's say you have a fairly wonky pot and it's hard to center, if you're just trimming it flat, it's not as big of a deal if it's not perfectly center. I'm not a huge control freak when it comes to pots being absolutely perfect. So if you have a pot that's not perfectly symmetrical, and maybe it's harder to center on your wheel head, but you're planning on just trimming it flat on the bottom, it's not a huge deal if it's a little bit off center. But when you're going for maybe making a foot ring, you want to make sure that your pot is as centered as possible. So now I've got 3 pieces of clay here. I took 1 piece of clay, broke them into 3 balls. I'm going to roll them into little sausages. I'm going to pack them around the outside of my pot. Put 1 hand on top of your pot, put a little pressure down to make sure that you're not going to shift your pot out of center after you spent all that time centering it. And then the other thing I like to do is make sure that I'm not pushing my clay directly into the side of my pot. I don't want to warp my rim, so I push down and into the wheel head, and that's just gonna naturally mush the clay upside pot without too much direct pressure. Okay, I'm gonna use some pretty basic trimming tools, ones that you can get for fairly cheap, and they're a good starting point. So this is my first tool. I use this to just trim my bottom flat. It's got a nice wide head, so it does a nice quick job of leveling out my bottom. Hold it like a pen. When you hold it like a pen, it elevates the handle and it prevents you from dragging this base of your tool on the bottom of your pot. If you hold it like this, you tend to let that bottom drag, and it's harder to arc your wrist like this to get the angle than it is to just hold it like a pen. I like to touch this upper edge down first into the center. If you need to, you can use your finger, make a little mark in the center of your pot, something to aim at, but get that right down in the center. You can hang out here forever and not do any damage. It's the second you start pushing that it will start trimming. So just hang out, wait until you feel nice and steady, and then when you feel good, push in a little bit, trim your center down, and then I flatten out the head of this tool, and I very slowly start pulling to the right. And this is flattening out my base. Hold your hand nice and steady, don't let the clay pull you around. And try and work between center and 3 o'clock. Don't let your tool start to slide up towards 12. Okay. I know my bottom's not very thick, so I know I can leave it at that. And I do want to show you a foot ring, so I'm also going to leave a little bit of thickness just so that I can do that. But now I'm going to trim down my edges a bit, just to get out any of the little wonkiness from the edge before I decide to put in my foot ring. I might trim my wall a little too. If your walls aren't very thick, you don't have to spend a lot of time trimming them, but this is how you can kind of alter the shape of your pot and really round it out through trimming. If you do have some really nice thick walls on your pot, you might want to spend some time trimming out that thickness. Okay, so at this point, if you want to put in a foot ring, I like to take my pin tool and I put my circle back in. I do it about maybe a ½ inch away from the edge. I like to leave a little room. And then I'm going to switch to a smaller trimming tool. I like to use the square side. This has a round side and it also has a square side. I prefer the square side for trimming my foot ring. Hold it again like a pen. Start in the center of your pot, trim that down a little, and then very slowly you're going to pull that tool just to the inner edge of that circle you made. Don't cross over the circle because this part is going to be your foot ring and you don't want to reduce the height there. You just want to reduce this center clay. I like to lean my pressure with this tool a little bit on the right corner. That way I can see that ridge that I'm kind of trimming in and keep it flat as I'm moving. Okay, you can make your foot ring as deep as you want. I mean, depending on how thick your bottom is. If you have a really thick bottom, you can make a really deep foot ring. I like the depth of this. It's definitely recessed enough that if I wanted to put a little glaze in there, I could. You could also leave it like this if you want. That's still a foot ring. But if you really want to make it stand out, you can use the same tool, square side, and you can trim in from the outside. So hold it vertically. Don't let the tool tilt inwards or tilt outwards. And you're going to touch this bottom corner down against the edge of your pot first. So come around the outside here, touch your corner down, and then you're very slowly working your way in towards the center of your pot. You can see how that has kind of pronounced an edge from the outside as well. And then to really accentuate it, same tool, I'm going to come down on top and I'm going to start to trim some of this bulk away, also smooth away the lines from my trimming tool. Okay, the last thing that I like to do personally is I burnish with my fingers. So I use 2 fingers on the right side of my foot ring and I just let my fingers run over the flat bottom and over the corners to make sure that nothing is very sharp. This will let me feel if there's any bumpy bits that are kind of poking out. I like to burnish to kind of protect the surfaces of tables when you put your mug down. You don't want it to scratch. I like to burnish the middle a little too, just with my finger. Some people use ribs and stuff for this. You can do that, that's fine. I just use my finger. Okay, so that's a nice little foot ring. I like to put my initials. I don't have a nice stamp. You can get a nice stamp. One day maybe I'll get one, but for now I'm just doing my initials. So I do it inside the foot ring. And that's it. I'm good to go. Any minor little flaky bits of clay, I don't stress about them too hard. When this is drier, I can just use a sponge and sponge them out, or they kind of just fall off naturally. So don't stress too hard. If there's a lot, use your tool and get them out. But that's it. That's a nice little foot ring in the bottom of my mug.